There are still a few people filing in from the hall. Sounds like there was a pretty exciting event this morning. So this now is Capital Clarity. As you know, a couple of years ago, former Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin started this program as a way of bringing the people and the legislative process and state government together. Because sometimes it can seem a bit overwhelming what goes on. Now, I've been immersed in this for the past 6 weeks since I started this job at Idaho Freedom Foundation. And it's overwhelming to me. So I can't imagine how it is for somebody who's got a day job and another life outside of this. So this is just a way to bring the government and the people together, because that is that's the point of our representative government. It is overseen by the people, and you need to know what's going on in order to do that properly. So today we're going to talk about a subject that has been growing in importance the last few years. I know most of you have probably heard of ESG, environmental social governance. We all remember President Reagan. He told us that the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." He told us that government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem. And so for people who are conservative, we've grown to see the government as this perhaps necessary evil that needs to be contained, whereas private business is this thing that needs to be unleashed. And generally that's been true. But what happens when private businesses start getting together and dictating policy? When private businesses are grown so powerful, like these investment firms such as BlackRock and Vanguard are so powerful that they are larger than government. What happens when there's an incestuous relationship between these big conglomerates and government? And they start pushing things like ESG as metrics for how, what businesses should survive and what shouldn't. What about when they start pushing those same metrics on people? And then we're getting uncomfortably close to a Chinese-style social credit system. So I don't want to steal too much thunder, because we have somebody in our state government who is fighting against this specter and who is doing what she can to fight back against it and to make sure that the people of Idaho and the businesses of Idaho are free of this constraint. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our State Treasurer, Julie Ellsworth.
Thank you, Brian. I love roving mics, so this is going to be very difficult to behave. I like to go out and get in my audience. I am Julie Ellsworth. I was elected 4 years ago as a state treasurer and just re-elected. And I served 12 years in the Idaho legislature, 2 terms in House leadership. I actually shared an office with Speaker Mike Moyle when he first got in leadership. So I, like I say, have been through hell, and he loves that. And I'm a mom. I have children that have been in the public schools. I've taught in public schools and voted for charter schools, seen the evolution that happens in the state of Idaho, because I believe that when you're governing, it's about people. And it's interesting because now I'm the treasurer, and I was very interested in the treasury because in my service in the legislature, we oversaw this office. And I worked on getting the bond ratings for the state with a former state treasurer. So when the seat came up, I was just so excited and ran for it and won. But everything really is about money. And I don't mean to make that sound like a money grubber, but that is what the fight is really about. And if you can watch how money's moving, you can really diagnose problems, or you can create freedom. The movement of money is really everything. So, Treasurer says money's the whole thing. But I look at things that didn't work out for children, and it was the movement of money or somebody pulling strings that I didn't see. So I entered the Treasury 4 years ago, and I thought I would quietly go out into the state of Idaho and elevate all portions of the state with good financial means, and good management of money, which is what the Treasury really does. You tend to be very quiet because you're elevating the funds of the state and helping local governments. And then I got a call from the West Virginia State Treasurer, Riley Moore. This was 2 years ago, and he said, "Julie, they are shutting down my state." And I said, "I need a little more information on that." And he said, "The big banks, the financing, They will no longer finance exploration of oil and gas or mining, coal mining, and they will not provide financing for my state. And I thought, okay, I see how this game's being played here. You want to take on these certain industries and just starve them, that happened at the latter part of the Obama administration. They did Operation Trigger Lock, which was their term, where they were trying to divert money from financing anything having to do with the firearms industry. It was a very concerted effort. And so now we're going to implement the Green New Deal through the Treasury, essentially. And the Treasurer of West Virginia said, will you join me in signing on to a letter to these big banks saying, hey, if you're going to boycott us, we're not going to be using you. You don't get to boycott our state and then take all our money and manage it and do with it as you please. And, it took me 1 minute to analyze how Idahoans would benefit from that. And I said, absolutely. 15 of us treasurers signed on at that time. I want to now tell you, it has evolved. There's 28 state treasurers that are now, hi, people that came to my office. There are 28 state treasurers now that have joined together to push back against this undemocratic means of controlling money. You don't take it through Congress and say, we're going to do Green New Deal on it, but you shake hands in some backdoor boardroom and say, hey, we're not going to provide financing for these industries, these legal industries. So there's 28 of us that have now found each other, and we're conservative state treasurers. We represent half the money in the nation, and we now get the attention of fund managers like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, all this effort to turn us into, people, the Green New Deal. It has been expressly been said that they're going to take the Green New Deal through the Treasury, through the financial means of the country. And we are engaged, we are pushing back, we join with people on the federal level, we are opposing requirements for SEC, and I'll tell you more about that because I know that's really exciting. Treasurers find that really exciting. But what I love is that the momentum that you get when you join 28 people together. You can pick on me as the Idaho State Treasurer and say, you're just podunk, you represent 12 billion. But I've got my team of Avengers behind me, and now we're talking real money, and we are getting attention. And to that point, environmental social governance is basically the term that they are using to accommodate, to facilitate this undemocratic movement through the financial industry. And recently we created an educational video to tell people quickly what ESG is, because you're probably asking, what is this term? Personally, I think it's vague on purpose, so that they can abuse it more. But we've created a video, and I'll have them show it to you now. And I want to tell you one thing, that it's on YouTube. And whenever you would Google on YouTube ESG, it was all this positive, wonderful stuff. And then my little video got there, and I just love that, because it's the truth about ESG. This is an educational video, and I'll hope you enjoy it.
ESG is a relatively new term that many Idahoans may be hearing about and asking, what is it, and how does it affect them? ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance. It is a movement to advance public policy agendas through undemocratic means. Investment managers, financial institutions, insurance companies, and rating agencies are examples of those using ESG ratings to look at non-financial or subjective criteria as they measure investment options or the credit worthiness of a company or of a state. So what do the letters of ESG refer to? The E in ESG looks at environmental factors like a company's carbon emissions, green energy initiatives, and air and water pollution. The S in ESG examines social factors and how a company treats people through their policies on things like employee gender and diversity, customer satisfaction, and company sexual harassment policies. The G in ESG looks at governance and how a company is run by the diversity of its board members, political contributions, and who and what they lobby for. On the surface, these factors may look like a good thing. The problem is that they are all subjective. wanted to show you a couple of examples that show the impact of these ESG ratings and the impact they are having on companies and why the ratings are not as good as they seem. The first example is from November 2021, when West Virginia led a coalition of officials in 15 states, including Idaho, to act in response to the ongoing and growing economic boycott of traditional energy production industries by U.S. financial institutions. This was in response to ESG pressures by national environmental groups driving banks, insurance companies, and investment managers to abandon fossil fuels, even though these companies have to meet all environmental laws set by public policy. The second is from Utah, where a utility company, which delivers power to approximately 25,000 customers, recently learned its longtime auto insurer wouldn't renew coverage for the fleet. The utility owns a coal-burning power plant and has stakes in two others. The insurance company is phasing out business with companies that derive profits from coal. It is not hard to see how these ESG rating criteria can negatively affect Idaho and our industry. It is important that we protect our states and our businesses. You can find more information on this topic, including my work on ESG, by going to my website, sto.idaho.gov, and clicking on the red banner on the homepage.
Okay, so I want to invite you to keep that homepage, sto.idaho.gov, and you can find anything that I'm talking about, because, I mean, that's a pretty good overview of really the simple explanation on ESG. I think when entities try to make it more complicated, I think that's purposeful. I think that there is a desire to have it unknown, because if you can't identify it, then it becomes a vehicle for much more. So where did we take it from here? Again, we started with the 15, we're now at 28, and I don't believe it's any accident that this time in history there are 28 state treasurers who are ornery enough to get involved and push back. Over our dead body, will you take this policy through the Treasury? That is undemocratic. If you want policies passed, we are complying with environmental standards, we are complying with employment law, we are complying with social laws that exist on the federal and state level. Who are you to come in with these extra standards and enforce them upon us? There is nothing good that will come of that. And there's 28 of us that have just started the process. And so if you can imagine how busy we've gotten, you've heard different governors now pushing back against it. Last week, Senator Crapo and Senator Risch signed on to joint legislation, a piece of legislation that would actually push back against this effort on a national level. You know, we don't know how many years it will take to accommodate that, but we do know that we can do things on the state level. And that is what I've been involved in the last year. For the last 10 months, we basically have been working on legislation with all of the big businesses and the small business people and the bankers and the credit unions, all these interested parties, in finding a way that we can say it's anti-ESG legislation. Yesterday it was introduced in State Affairs. Representative Wysoski, are you in State Affairs? Okay, it was introduced. Write down these numbers. It's House Bill 189, House Bill 190, and House Bill 199. I know this good representative is a co-sponsor of these pieces of legislation, but essentially this is what it does. House Bill 189 says, guess what? If you want to be a contractor and work for the state and, you know, compete for some of the business in the state, which, by the way, the state is the trust of the people. It's the people's money. So if you want these contracts, you need to certify that you're not boycotting our businesses. What a great idea, huh? You would think there would be 100% agreement on that. And after 10 months, we got it printed. You know, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of pushback, a lot of the sky is falling, but in essence, it is the people's money. It is not a right of any business that chooses to boycott us that they can then come in and have our contracts. And if it's in our best interest to contract with an entity that is boycotting, like for example, the firearm industry or other industries, Well, we have a right, we can provide an exemption for you, but that's if it's in our best interest. And that exemption will be disclosed publicly and be maintained in the public record. Okay, example of that. I am the state treasurer. We manage $12 billion a year. Any given day, $50 to $80 million is moving through my office. I have an investment division that interacts with Wall Street every morning. At 5 in the morning, it walks, and the platform that I need for them is Bloomberg. It is software that provides that access for us so that we can have live trades with Wall Street, which benefits the Idaho taxpayers. Last year, we returned $42 million in interest earnings back to taxpayers. Now, if you are doing ESG Bloomberg, for example, it would be detrimental to the state for me to cut you off because then I would hurt my constituency. I have the flexibility to provide an exemption for them, but it's because we need them, not because they're entitled to the business, and that exemption will be disclosed to the public. The second bill is about, I feel so, old on this. The second bill is about, this is House Bill 190, is about the state treasurer's office. In my office, as I told you, we got $12 billion, 50 to 80 million a day going back and forth. And if you can imagine, the whole thing that I'm doing is making sure that we have contracts with banks and credit unions that can facilitate the flow of this money. I choose those credit unions based on certain criteria. We're adding another criteria. They're called depositories for the state. And the third criteria is now you need to certify that you're not boycotting our industries. And that's such a sticky point because, some of us are. There are larger banks that have signed on to net zero, which is a European effort to shut down oil and gas. And, I have lots of things to think about that, but first of all, why do we have to do what Europe needs? And then I was told by the larger businesses that in order to do business in Europe, we need to be part of this coalition. And I thought that's interesting because you signed the pledge, last month. What did you do the previous 200 years, to work in Europe? But, it's a concerted effort to get people to sign on. It's one of those European coalitions. Okay, some banks have signed on to that. In what world is it helpful to you as my constituents in the state of Idaho to cut off oil and gas or the refinement of it? We are at the end of the distribution pipeline. This is not electricity that circulates. That's our gas prices. I'm sorry, I can't look at my constituency and think that that's helpful in any world. And so I asked one of the larger banks, they come and visit my office periodically, and I asked the gentleman, I just need to understand how that would be helpful. And I have not received an answer. In this legislation now, I can ask them, are you boycotting in certain areas, industries that are important to our state? And if they are, and if I need them, meaning Idahoans need them because I can't find any other branches in some remote place, they could qualify for an exemption, which will then be disclosed and maintained publicly. The third bill, it's just so amazing how much pushback it gets. The third bill says state of Idaho, or the people's trust in Idaho, whatever level of government you're at, you do not get to use the filter of ESG standards to cut people out of getting contracts with you. Do you see what it means? Like the state of Idaho can't do this on the private sector. I'll tell you briefly of an example. I won't tell you who it is, but it is a local builder that has great deep roots in the state of Idaho and been a good contributor to our community for years. They were applying for a third phase of building contract through the public building service and a college. They did not receive the third contract after having built the first two phases because they didn't reach the bid number that was necessary. And it was awarded to a company in Portland who then would come to Idaho and use their employees, take his employees to accomplish this contract. Now, this gentleman is experienced enough and does not necessarily need to have this business, but is invested in Idaho. He has enough international business and, he thought, what happened? I am going to find out. So ultimately sat down with one of the evaluators had given him a 60% in the evaluation. This is a contract by the public. You're having private industry bid on it, and he was evaluated with a 60%, and everybody else is 98, 99, because he's the real deal. You understand losing a contract, but you don't understand losing it to Portland and then coming in and taking people. So he sat down with that evaluator and said, what can I improve? What do I need to do? And the first thing stated to him, and I know this is true because people say, oh, that didn't really happen. Well, people have been let go because of this. Rest of the story, the first thing this evaluator said to him was, well, you didn't introduce yourself with your preferred pronoun. And I'm thinking, this is an example of, guess what, Idaho public, you don't get to put an extra filter unless that filter is in law. You show me a statute that says I have to introduce myself with my preferred pronoun, and then you put that as part of the RFP, but you don't use it as anyway. So the second thing was there's an American flag on the website and on their uniform. The third thing was that they didn't have enough diversity in their leadership. Do you see that little video I showed you? Like I see the little doodly art going, oh my gosh, it's exactly what I was saying. But they didn't have enough diversity, but it wasn't the right kind of diversity because I happen to know this gentleman has women in all the upper level governance structure. It wasn't the right kind of diversity. Then there was a fourth one. Tana, what was the fourth one? I can't remember. Something that would irritate me just as much. But these are not standards that are appropriate for you to take. So this third bill, which is House Bill 191, says you can't do that. You essentially cannot do that. The standard needs to be in law. You don't get to use these arbitrary filters. I call ESG a filter. And we hope to see all three of those bills pass. There are 40 co-sponsors in the House. We have not yet listed the ones in the Senate. But I want you to know that it was 10 months of pushback, of this can't be done, this can't be done. I think this is a small ask when we are the people's trust. It is your money, and you don't get to try to be hurting us and then ask for our money, to facilitate you. I hope to see them pass and you can track them with those numbers. And I think I'll stop there and yield to any questions, or did I leave something out, Tana? You got a question back there.
Yes, ma'am. So if the ESG score is quantified, do you as the state treasurers have any quantification of the companies who are attempting to implement this? For example, giving BlackRock a score of 100 and say PIMCO a score of 50. Do you have any way to quantify how these companies are attempting to actually implement this?
Okay, that brings me to one thing that I neglected to say. Last year at the end of the session, we did pass a bill pushing back on ESG with respect to the proxy vote and investments. And that's what you're talking about with and it became clear that we have a Prudent Investor Act in the state of Idaho, and that our will and our power in the aggregate of our money shall be used in accordance with our policies of the state. You cannot use them to facilitate any of the Green New Deal liberal agenda. Did I answer your question? What was the other nuance of your question?
I guess the real question is the state of Idaho going to continue to do business with BlackRock?
And okay, I'd like you to get right down to it. Okay, so you got BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. I checked my investments. BlackRock is not used as an investment manager, but the thing that bill did was it said up front that those managers need to declare that they will adhere to voting our will according to our statutes. But more importantly, they now must publish how these votes are being voted. And it's great what Sunshine does, because once you have to show how you're voting stuff, it becomes very problematic if you're not doing it well. To tell you when that was implemented in July, And this was a component of pushing back on ESG. It's the investment side of it. In July, I wrote every one of my investment managers for the monies that I manage in our office and told them this law is going into effect. You will need to tell me that disclose quarterly how you're voting these votes, and they shall be voted this manner. And I got, okay, back from most of them. Then there was one that volunteered not to work for me, but then came around because I received an educational piece in the letter telling me that ESG is good and and the SEC does not require us to disclose this, but once a year to the SEC. We're saying it's our data, disclose it. And he didn't think he needed to do that. And so I put the letter down and thought, I'll think about that for a day or two. And within 7 days, he had written back and said, yes, we can comply. Because you know what? It is our money. And to that point, BlackRock, as the 28 treasurers have gotten together, BlackRock has met with us. And BlackRock is not managing a lot of I have some in what is it? Diversified funds. How you have to, there are two things of a BlackRock product, but as a fund manager, they are not managing up. And so those things will roll off so it doesn't hurt Idahoans, and then we're out of BlackRock. That's my office. There's other things that are invested in the state of Idaho that we will learn about. But BlackRock told us, 28 state treasurers, we would give your proxy vote back if you just asked us for it. And, I'm a mom. And my reaction was, the proxy vote was never yours, and it will be voted in accordance with our statutes. And I just thought that the nerve of you to say that you're going to return it to us when you never even had the right to take it in the beginning, that's the mom thing, But we're seeing now, what you're seeing nationally is these state treasurers are divesting if they do have funds with BlackRock. And so you see the divestation. We do not have a lot. Essentially, I'm divesting because it will roll off, but these people had billions, a lot of the different treasuries, and we do not have a lot. Next point. Vanguard is the next big guy. So BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. You can tell I love this, don't you? Okay, so Vanguard. I didn't think I'd ever see this in my lifetime. Vanguard in December, this was my Christmas present, which makes you worry about me, huh? Okay, they said that they are pulling out of net zero, that agreement. I didn't think I'd see that in my lifetime, that one of the big three. And I thought, well, it's a good thing because you're managing our college savings accounts, and that was going to be problematic. And of course, I had asked them about that in June, and I just think, wow, we're seeing improvements here. Another thing we saw a week and a half ago was there's a German bank that established the net zero thing in Europe. Started the whole problem, you guys. This German bank pulled out of it a week and a half ago. Okay, I didn't think I was going to see that. And so we're seeing corrective action taking place. And it's good to know that I can have my proxy votes back if I ask nicely. Did you have a question? And then I'll go over here. Yeah, you go ahead back there. And then we'll go to the what? Oh, that. I am.
Already done this in a few countries.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they do it. That's how they do it in finance, what I understand. So they get to determine how much money you have in your bank, how much you can spend based on these digital currencies. You're out of luck. You don't follow the rules. So I'm just wondering, do we have a gold standard backing that works or something that's going to back our money, and they would be allowed to turn all of this currency into a digital cash?
I think currently, if you don't allow it on an individual level, just refuse to do it, because there is an unbanked portion of the state, right, and that's secondary. But to that point, there's other reasons why you don't want digital currency. Currency would always go to these local banks, and then that would feed the community. And you know how I talk? That's what I love about the Treasury. It can elevate, society when you manage funds. So, you always had that pattern, and it would facilitate the local community and grow things that were meaningful to people. See how money's everything, You turn that into a digital cyber thing, it just flies over you. You're flyover country now, again. In terms of anything to push back on that, it is not recognized in the state statutes for any investment policy, and we do not use it as a vehicle to pay warrants. Warrants are essentially the state paying a check to you. It's just a fancy word. But, we don't acknowledge that. I have serious concerns about anything electronic. And to that point, I'm a mom. I know that I can turn off the internet for a kid, and I know what havoc it does to their life. That's exactly what it is. Somebody can just shut the light off on you. I get it, but we are not embracing it in the state, but there's not an organized effort that I know of on the national level. I work pushing back against the SEC standards and different things that would help facilitate this agenda. And I find that very fascinating, and I love writing letters saying we hate this, but it takes pushback. Representative Wyszynski, did I say it correctly? Oh, whatever. That.
You mentioned the prejudice against firearms and
Uh-huh.
ammunition manufacturers. What are some of the other politically motivated ESG factors that some of these agencies are using in other parts of the world?
It's particularly oil and gas and the refinement and anything in that process. And it's really focused on energy right now, which is what they expressly said this through the Treasury, Janet Yellen, that they were doing these things, which got us all pushing back. But it's mostly energy and those types of things that they're really taking on nationally.
Follow-up. You mentioned that ESG is environmental, social, and governance. Well, there's a social component.
Uh-huh.
And that would imply that perhaps political affiliation,
Mhm.
affiliation with certain groups that might not be in favor of those
Absolutely.
views as well. Do you have any idea of some of those? implications?
I'm asked, okay, so as a treasurer, I always wanted in writing, and like these bills that we're doing, they deal with public monies. And so the private sector, there can be claims and different things, and my lane is public monies. But I was asked on a lot of I was called by legislators when they saw different things happening this summer in Idaho. Why are companies jumping on board with these different things and co-sponsoring them? Is that ESG? Now, I do not have access to their internal data, so I could say just philosophically that is a component. But I would not claim it against a company unless I saw the data that showed it. But the social component is very much mirrors those questions, or those remember a gentleman who was denied the project to the Portland provider. It's very much focused on those type of questions that he did not pass, that quite frankly, he didn't even know were in the mix because they should not have been. You had one. Yes, you. The bills in the legislation does ask every level of government to check for, are you boycotting us? And so you can imagine what pushback it is, but you ask a lot of questions when you do an RFP. Why can it not be, are you trying to hurt us on the side? That's not exactly how it's asked. Dennis Smiler, you had a question back here, then here, and then Brian.
Okay, my question is, can the state create its own filters? Two-part question, meaning that the state won't invest in criminal companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, and we can divert that money from local companies, local food production companies, so that we're less reliant on federal government and we're protecting the citizens from these criminal companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson.
I think your answer, when I hear your question, his question was, can we divert money from companies that are doing these criminal acts? Okay, I think that's part already in play, and that is the RFP, the letting of the contracts. Let's do it up front and make sure you're using these filters. And it just hasn't been done that way before. And I saw the impact it had with investment managers when I asked them up front, and then all of a sudden they're changing how they do business because they have to show it. So I don't think the state has a law except for the request for the service. There was another hand, yes. Oh, thanks.
My question is in regards to the bill 191. If I understood you right, it took a while to get that bill right now. Are you foreseeing or do you know that there's going to be pushback for that bill to get passed?
I believe that there is always opposition, and I believe that some people take their mask off and come up to you up front and, push back that way, and other people are doing it in a way that is less trackable. And the way to remedy that is to work for 10 months on this, but also you guys speak up. You tell your legislators this is good. It's measured. It's not Attila the Hun saying we're cutting down everything, although wouldn't that be fun? I'm not disagreeing, but as public monies, I can take a measured approach, and I have seen results even with our investment law just from sunshine. Did that answer your question? Your involvement to support it will offset anything that is being done subversively. And yes.
There's a bill being proposed that would set money to parents to pay for their children's education as opposed to the normal public school system. And the concern has been raised, it sounds like a worry that bureaucrats would apply ESG principles to how they use the money, something like that. So you think there could be a way to prevent that kind of problem? You know what I'm talking about?
I do know what legislation you're talking about. I have not been involved in it other than if money moves, I'll help you with the vehicle. So will lots of other people, and they'll make money off of it, just saying. But on that one, there is always a danger when you take money from a public entity that there will be strings attached. And so money taker beware. I can't tell you yes or no, but just there is always that risk. It's just like the risk of turning off the internet for your kids. Yeah, you're living off of me. I can turn it off. Have you ever done that? You parents out there, isn't it fun? This causes so much harm. It remedies every problem. Okay. Yes, Brian.
Have you seen any pushback from Idaho businesses, big businesses that are based here in Idaho, to your work against ESG?
I have seen, and that has been the last few months. And I always, Tana's smiling over here because we always, I want to point to language, and I want it language that's measurable. Can you tell me what your concern is? And let's see if we can pound out the language. And I've never received language. So I think the concern is we just don't want you to do it. But again, it is not your right to have a contract with the state. It is a privilege because this is the people's money. It's not Julie Ellsworth's money. It is the trust of the people. And so I just reject that whole premise that it's any company's right to have the business for our public dollars, our public trust. It's me talking to BlackRock again. It was never yours to begin. But it is important for people to understand, who controls, who's in charge. And if you don't know you're in charge, then the vacuum gets filled by somebody else. Are there other questions? Yes.
Is there a word evidence
Ah.
makes these statements, or are these just free-floating ideas and BlackRock?
I believe that's my whole problem with it. Who is making the standard and how is it measured? Because if you can measure something, then you can meet a requirement. And to that point, I think the answer is no, we don't know who's really making the standards. You see them move around willy-nilly, and my concern working with our federal delegation is that if those standards get into the SEC regulations that regulate the banking and the different financial industries, then it becomes this de facto standard that I still don't know who's pulling the strings. And I think that's by design. They don't want you to know who's pulling the strings. So no, I do not know who's making them. We have joined together as leaders in Idaho, including the governor and the executive officers, the leaders in the House and Senate, pushing back against Standard & Poor's coming up with this arbitrary standard for credit rating of the state. Credit rating of the state is very important. Everything down from the state benefits from a good credit rating of the state. So it's taxpayer cost, you know. We'll make it cheap if we're good. Well, they want to now put an ESG rating in that. We're like, who the heck came up with that idea? And hello, that is not your charge from Congress. Of course, we didn't say it that way in the letter. But, you know, we're saying, no, this is not an acceptable standard. It's not even measurable. All of us signed on to that. And my take to the rating agencies that wish to do an ESG standard is, when you are rating us for risk, they'll say, oh, you don't want us to look at environmental factors? This is absolutely false. We have always looked at environmental factors. We have always looked at governance and those types of things. There are federal laws and state laws governing it that you must comply with. Those have always been baked into a rating. And now this agency wants to take out just the ones that they like, you know, the environmental one and the governance one, and put it in a little side report card. And I said to them, why don't you take out that we pay off our debt early and put that in a side report card? You know, let's have that be the early payoff debt report card. You know, it's the same difference, except it wouldn't make a bigger coastal state look good. We do have a AAA credit rating, the highest you can get right now. So, you know, they didn't ding us. We got that just a year ago. And I think that's out of good efforts from good management of monies. Again, money is everything, and good management lifts people. Did you have other questions? Did I answer your question? Okay, go ahead. You know, I'm familiar that North Dakota is the only one that is actually a bank for their state. I do the banking function where I make sure that money, you know, I facilitate the flow of money, you know, and I bank it. You cannot bring money into the state of Idaho and have it in a backpack in the governor's office. You know, it shall come to the Treasury. This is how the Constitution sees it. But if you make a state bank, I have not studied that a lot. There's some negatives on that I see. You know, you vest a lot of power, and there's a lot of times we need to put financial deals together that would require much more than any state bank would have. So there is a need to rely on bigger deals. And beyond that, I really haven't checked into how North Dakota is doing it. Generally, I think I would not favor something like that, because you'd have to have regulatory processes in the state of Idaho, and then you'd get personalities, and you'd get, you know, the same thing. It's just a different group of people doing it, you know? That's any other questions? Don't you like how I talk to BlackRock? Yeah, it's our vote. Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah. Okay, so if you came to my office, you would know that I love the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, and, you know, and that's where people are afraid of me, because then I get up. I'm very excited, but I love the Idaho Constitution. The Idaho Constitution took a governor and siloed the governor, said, these are your duties, you can have agencies. But then it made another executive branch called the Secretary of State. You're over all of this stuff dealing with laws for voting. The governor can't go in it. To the extent you let him, he can, but the governor doesn't have any say. You know, that is your function. If there's legislation, he needs to sign it. The treasurer, again, you know, the governor cannot try to move ARPA dollars in a different way. I'm not trying to make this adversarial, but it's siloed there, and the money will move based on that constitutionality. The controller is my check on the money, and it's beautiful because I receive the monies and Brandon spends it all, you know? But what a beautiful check and balance. So the Constitution siloed us. This hand that takes in all the money cannot be the same hand that's spending it. And it eliminates a great deal of possibility for fraud. And And I marvel at how wise, well, they knew people would try to abscond with money. So they must have known that, because, well, it's just since the beginning of time. But yeah, it's a separate power. We even have separate systems, but ironically, or I guess not ironically, every day I told you to do that 50 to 80 million, they have to balance to the penny. And then you have to balance to the controller's office. That's a lot of balancing. But does that answer your question? We really check and balance. He will write a warrant, a check, and then ask for me to fund it. And I'll say pretty please, and do this ESG standard. I'm just kidding. No, I don't. Okay, are there other questions? We have about 5 minutes. Yes.
I hope this isn't too much off topic, but I have a friend who's a CFO of a small financial investment firm. And I'm pretty sure he's not a workforce absolute. Would it be okay if I asked him to wait?
Sure. Yeah, we have a process that anybody that wishes to do business, the Treasury Office is essentially the CFO of the state. We have matrix that show when money's needed, and so we make sure that we're investing it and we're going to meet the need as it's being drawn by that spender, Brandon, the controller. But yeah, it is very much a CFO position in that respect. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Julie, just a comment. I just want to thank you for
Oh, thanks.
your standard ESG and little anecdote. I was traveling to China about 4 years ago, stepped on the train with my Chinese train, and there was an announcement. And the announcement basically said, your social score could be impacted by what you do on the trains. So they were watching all
Yeah.
the time, and social score gets impacted, it has real impact.
It does. It creeps in, and as in my role that I'm in now, in my lane, I see this as where I am stopping and working to push back. I saw another question over here. Was there one other? Maybe not. Yes.
So, I recently paid for registration fees for my vehicle.
Mhm.
And what I noticed, on that bill was that if I paid via credit card over the internet, it was a slightly cheaper situation than if I actually went in and wrote a check, which is, of course, effectively currency money in the office. What can the treasurer's office do to ensure that the state is not disadvantaging cash payments and therefore helping to face the law, essentially a central bank digital currency via credit card?
It was cheaper to do it via credit card. Oh, that changed. That's different from what my last experience was, then, because they go through this one entity that I think gouges you, but I'm not going to say who it is. I will find out. I don't know if there is something that I can fiscally do without facilitating.
And I mean, the question isn't really specifically about that payment, but just in
Mhm.
general, what policies can the treasurer's office do to ensure that we maintain a cash economy rather than a purely digital?
I have been asked about that. As long, we do maintain, well, you hate to advertise I have cash in the treasury, because that sets you up for, Mr. Bandon over here. No, but we maintain that when cash is the currency, we will always have cash available in the treasury, because banks will cut you off too. They won't, that kind of stuff. So we will always maintain cash until it is determined that that is no longer the system.
But will the state always take that cash at the same rate as it will take a digital payment?
I don't think so. I don't think I could say yes or no on that. I think that they're gauging that rate based on what discount they're getting for the use of the credit cards. So I didn't know that this was happening in all these different agencies, but I can assure you that cash will always be in the treasury. And that to that point, there are a lot of unbanked people in the state of Idaho that will get a warrant from the state and they need a place to cash it and use real money. That's what we do. It seems, legislators have asked me about that and thought it seemed antiquated, but my response, some legislators, not this one, but my response was that when it's legal tender, it's legal tender, and that's what we accommodate. So I don't have a very good answer for you there in getting down in that detail, but I will look at it, see if I can find out something we can do. Thanks. Is that good? Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Treasurer Ellsworth. I think it's exciting to see someone who is so excited to be on the front lines of this battle. Imagine where we would be if we had a Soros-funded, left-wing, social justice pushing treasurer in Idaho. Things would not be good for us. Yes, and other states, that is their situation. Yeah, I was just reflecting that, here we have, Treasurer Ellsworth. A few weeks ago, we had Controller Brandon Wolf. We are really blessed here in Idaho, especially here in Boise, for those who could make it here in person, to have such transparency from our state government and our elected officials, to be able to just come and talk to them and tell them, our issues, our problems, our concerns, and have them actually listen. It's something we should appreciate and definitely not take for granted. And that is exactly what Capital Clarity was made to do, to facilitate that connection. We are working on scheduling people for our next couple of weeks. This will go until the session is over. So if you have some ideas, some suggestions, feel free to let me know, or go to capitalclarity.com, and there's a form you can fill out and tell us. There's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you're not already on our email list, you can sign up to get our emails about Capital Clarity and the other things that Idaho Freedom Foundation is working on. And with that, I would like to thank you for coming and wish you a good rest of the day.